my best shot isn't going to be very good. If I hit the paper at all, it'll be a miracle. All right. Grossly unprepared teacher tonight, guys. So don't hold that against me. It was very short notice for me. Um, but if there's anything that I could ever do to help Tyler out, I sure would. So you're gonna get what you got, or you're gonna have what you get, or whatever. I don't know. I have no idea. So anyway, what were some of the things that we talked about last week? Anybody have any real recollection of those? No, not even the pastor who taught the lesson last week doesn't remember what he taught on last week. Oh, nobody listens. So, one of the main takeaways I think was how did death enter into the world? So sin cometh by one man, death cometh by one man. Decisions that he made. We talked about how it was that God laid out kind of this plan in Eden. It was, hey, there's just one rule, guys. Don't do this one thing, and everything will be great. But by the time Adam screws that up for all of us, and Moses climbs to the top of the mountain and comes down, he's got 2 tablets of stone, and on there are written how many rules? 10 rules. So it seems like we should be able to keep 10 rules, right? How'd man do with 10 rules? Not very good. So from the time Moses came down the mountain to the time Christ went up the mountain, we talked about the number of rules that had become written, and that was like 613, I think. Awfully hard. If you can't keep 1, how are you going to keep 10? If you can't keep 10, how are you going to keep 613? So God needed plan B, because we weren't working out so good, were we? We weren't doing as we should do. We weren't following the simplest of all rules. You can eat of anything in this whole garden except from that tree. What do they do? I think I want what's on that tree. So you can do everything except these 10 things. What do? Broke all those 10 things that we weren't supposed to do, right? So the burden of the regulation and the laws became more and more and more. So what did God say? You know what? Let's kind of revise this. They can't keep 613 laws. What can I do for them that'll give them a chance to live beyond just this life? Decided, well, I guess I've got to go down to where they are, and I've got to live the life they can't. I've got to die the death that they deserve and be raised back up by my Father. And all they have to do is what? Believe on that and trust in that. How are we doing with that? Not all of us are doing real well all the time, are we? Flip back. We're going to grab one verse out of chapter 5 of Romans. And that'll be verse 17. So Romans 5:17 says, "For if by one man's offense," who was that man? Adam. "Death reigneth by one, much more they which receive abundance of grace and the gift of righteousness shall reign in life by one, Jesus Christ. So there's one word in there that I really, really like, but I can't pull it out of context very well, but that's the word abundance. So what's abundance mean? Overflowing. Is an abundance just a sufficient amount? It, it's more than you need, right? It's more than what's necessary. Is abundance, you better not lose a single bit of this because you won't have enough. Not that, right? It's an abundance. More than you need, overflowing. What did he give us in abundance? Grace. So what's grace? Unmerited favor, right? Something that we don't deserve. Okay. And the gift of righteousness shall reign in life by one, Jesus Christ. So Adam messed everything up for all of us, I guess, right? And who made everything right for all of us? Okay. Chapter 6, verse 1 says, or Paul says, what shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? So, in the very short time that I was given to really study for this, the thing, and Mike used an awesome analogy when he taught it a couple of weeks ago about how to figure out what's counterfeit, what's real. You know, there's certain things that are present on that dollar, $10, $20, $50, whatever, that validate it, that say, oh, this should be there. Sometimes if you see something that shouldn't be there, then you know that you got a counterfeit. If you don't see things that should be there, you know you have a counterfeit. So you're looking for everything that should be there being there, and looking for things that should not be there not being there, right? So kind of taking from his figuring out if it's real or fake, counterfeit or genuine, I started thinking about uh, checks and checking accounts and stuff like that. And I wondered what keeps us from writing check after check after check that's drawn from our actual bank account. So, what are the things, Liv, that keep you from writing check after check after check after check? Somebody with a checking account. Not having money in your account. Okay. Ah. So what keeps you from swiping your card time after time after time after time? Okay. Now, that's partly true. Um, it is possible to swipe your card and swipe your card and swipe your card. In the meantime, the bank's going cha-ching, 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 because they're charging you overdraft fees, right? So you could technically use your card. You could write a check and there not be money in the account to be able to cover the debt that you incurred, right? So we could literally, I'm going back to the check. Well, let's do this. Let's say we could literally write checks until we ran out of checks. Tyler, I'd write you a check, but I'm out of checks. I don't have any checks left. Would it matter if I had money in the account? I could still write the check if I had the check, right? Liv, she's swiping and swiping and swiping and swiping until you can't even read what bank the card's from anymore. And she's doing all kinds of tricks because the magnetic strip's about worn out. Would it matter necessarily if there was money in the account? No. You could use it time after time after time after time after time. You could write a check for anything you want. You could swipe it for anything you wanted. Um, you could write it for anything that you wanted at any time that you wanted to write it. and you could swipe it for anything that you wanted to swipe it for at any time you wanted to swipe it. If you had an endless supply of checks, you could write checks basically until somebody figured out you didn't have enough funds in there to cover, right? So let's pretend for a minute now that you've got an unlimited supply of money in your account. So for every time you swipe your card, if you swipe your card for $10, somebody puts 10 in, or 12 in, or 15 in. Every time you write $100 check, that's probably small chump change for somebody like Tyler. Every time you write like $10,000, $15,000 check, huge tips, stuff like that, we've heard about you. No, he's got very short arms. If you go out to eat with him, he's like I'll get it, and then he's got like these little Tyrannosaurus Rex arms, reaching for the check. I'm lying. I don't know. I'm telling stories because I don't have that much material tonight, and I'm like, I'm gonna have to fill this in with some silly stuff. So anyway, every time you swipe your card, you swipe it for 10, somebody puts 15 back in. He writes it for 1,000, somebody puts 1,500 back in. You've got an unlimited number of checks, and you've got like the ultra durable card. Okay, the stainless steel card with like premium paint on it, the chip, the magnetic strip, everything. You'll never wear your card out. And you've got an unlimited number of checks and a very big ink pen, and you can write anything you want, anytime you want for anything. Question, I guess, that I'm asking is, should we? Should we write checks all of the time for anything that we want at any time that we want it just because we can? Well, I just told everybody that every time Liv swipes for 10, somebody puts 15 back in. Basically, I'm saying, just like verse 17 of chapter 5 talked about abundant grace, we're kind of equating grace with money and money in your account. And God's ability, he can put back and put back and put back everything that we use or everything that we write. And we're just pretending that money is like grace or grace is like money. So we write a check and everything that's deducted from that account is put back plus some. So you're never going to have to worry about running out of money. Should you still yet just write the check just because you can? Okay, what's the analogy I'm pushing? If the account and the money in the account is like grace, what are we pretending each check is? Perfect. They said sin. Anybody in Facebook land? They said sin. They got the answer right. So should we be doing that just because we can? And you know, there are some doctrines even that stand, and some beliefs that are taken to say that you'll never outsin God's grace. Maybe, but should we try it? Should we be trying it? Yeah, yeah. So even though it is within God's purview or venue or whatever, to be able to forgive you and extend grace, grace more than sufficient to cover any sin that you might sin. it does not give us free reign or license, even though we have free will to do those things. Right. So, yeah. So, God does give us an abundance of grace. He gives us more grace than what we need. But we still yet should be good stewards of it, right? You agree with that? So, um, so Paul answers, he says, God forbid, how shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? So when he says God forbid, he's saying that we should not sin just because God supplies us abundant grace. That's fair, right? I think. And then he asks, how shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? Now, I went to the weeds here a little bit, but I didn't have much time to think about this. So um, there are some things that I kind of want to introduce to you guys um, that I'll make them make sense. They're going to sound like big philosophical terms and stuff like that, but they're not that bad. And if you think about them, you probably use them all the day, all the time, but you don't realize that you use them all the time. But it's basically just the laws of Aristotelian logic. And the first one is the law of identity. Okay? So the law of identity says that something is what it is. What can we conclude from that? If something is what it is, then something is not what it is not. Right? Easy enough? So if I had, what is this? How do you know? That's what we call this thing, right? So a pencil's got to be able to serve certain functions. It needs to be able to write, not ink, so it's not an ink pen. This has all the attributes of a pencil. Does this have any of the attributes of a pen? Share some common functions, but it doesn't have the attributes of a pen. So by the law of identity, if something is what it is and something is not what it is not, sorry about that, then this is a pencil to the exclusion of it being anything other than a pencil. Right? To the toothpick? You could John Elway toothpick right here, if anybody's old enough to remember him. So there's another law called the law of the excluded middle that basically says something is either true or it is false. It cannot be both true and false. Easy enough? So it is either true or it is false. It can't be, well, that's true and false. There's a law of non-contradiction that says if there's two contradictory statements made, then it's possible that one of the statements is true. And if one of them's true, then the other one is false. The only other scenario that can occur is that both of them can be false, but it's impossible for two contradictory statements to both be true. Then there's something called the law of rational inference, where if we have two true and valid statements, then we can derive a third true and valid statement from the first two. And there's this classic example that says, all men are mortal. Is that true? Is that valid? What does that mean? All men are mortal means all men will die. Second part of it is Socrates is a man. Was that true? Okay, and valid. So if all men are mortal and Socrates was a man, what do we know about Socrates? Socrates was mortal. Perfect. Perfect. So we've got to kind of ask questions. Did God save man to sin, or did God save man from sin? From. Saved him from sin. So a man is either dead to sin and alive in, what was that gift that he said that he gave us? Abundant grace and the gift of righteousness. Or righteousness and unrighteousness the same thing? Mm-mm. So man is either dead to sin and alive in righteousness, or he is alive in sin and dead to righteousness. Is that right, Lance? A man is either dead to sin and alive in righteousness, or he is alive in sin and dead to righteousness. He can't be both alive in sin and alive in righteousness, right? So a man cannot be both dead to sin and dead to righteousness. Right. I couldn't hear that last part. Yeah. So if someone is dead to sin, alive in righteousness through him, as that free gift that we received abundance of grace and the gift of righteousness. So there was the verses that we talked about where he imputed righteousness to man. He did not impute sin to man. He gave grace to man. Without grace, we cannot be righteous. So if we say something to the effect that all Christians are saved by grace, Tyler is a Christian. Tyler is saved by grace, right? If we said all Christians, man, my mind isn't working well enough right now to kind of get to where I'm trying to go, but if any part of that was all Christians are saved by grace, Tyler was not saved by grace, then Tyler is not a Christian, right? So we have to have that dimension and that part where we accept that free gift from him in order to be of him. And we cannot be of him by any other means than by that acceptance of that free gift. All right. Verse 3. Know ye not that so many of us as were baptized into Jesus Christ were baptized into his death? So symbolically, let's talk about the act of baptism. So we go down into the water, and that's representative of Christ's death, burial. Huh? Okay. I was not wording it well, possibly. So the going down into the water is representative of his death, his burial, our death, our burial in him. Okay. And then the coming out of the water is representative of his resurrection and our resurrection to a new life in him. Verse 4, therefore we are buried with him by baptism into death, that like as Christ was raised up from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we should also walk in newness of life. Doctrinally, there are some denominations that might say that it's the act of baptism that saves, and that one cannot be saved without being baptized. I don't think that that's the case. I hope that it's not the case. Yeah. Yeah. It's our demonstration to the world that we, like him, I have died in him and will be resurrected by him, just as he was. So we should walk in newness of life. Does that mean we should walk in the old paths that we always walked before? So newness and oldness are not the same thing, right? For if we have been planted together in the likeness of his death, we shall be also in the likeness of his resurrection. This all kind of comes back again to the outward presentation of something that's happened to an inward man in their decision to follow Christ, to, what's the word I'm looking for? Symbolically, he'd be buried in the water, symbolically be raised from the water, in death, raised in life. So, knowing this, that our old man is crucified with him, that the body of sin might be destroyed, that henceforth we should not serve sin. So that kind of comes back again to us continuing to write checks and to do things that we've been called out of, just for the sake of, oh, it's covered. Hey, it's covered. It'll be fine. Hey, it'll be fine. Hey, everything that I take out, God will put back in. He'll put back in more than I take out. But that's not really what he would have us to do. He wants us to be raised up to walk on a new path, not the old path, to walk in a newness of life, not the oldness of life, to veer off uh, of the path that we were walking that would lead us to death. So, mhm. um, there's a movement, I guess, amongst millennials, maybe, that were raised in church. Uh, they're calling it evangelical. Um, Particularly close to home, unfortunately, and very sadly. Um, but it's a Twitter hashtag at this point where there are people proudly saying, um, I may have been saved, may have been baptized as a kid, but now that I'm an adult, I am freeing myself of that, and publicly proclaiming that they've walked away from the faith. There's you, we started talking about something the other night, and memory does not serve me well right now. But we're talking about more movements where people um, are publicly uh, disclaiming whatever faith they may have been raised in childhood. There's a certain arrogance that I see in this, because, like I said, this hits close to home. Um, in that proclamation of I am freeing myself of everything that my mother may have believed, everything my father may have believed, everything that I may have believed at some point, um, to say, you know what, whatever abundance of grace I may have received from a particular profession as a child, I don't want anymore. That's a little frightening. Um, right. Yeah, it talked about a millstone around the neck and stuff like that. We were talking about that at the dinner table. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And part of that also is the fact that they're using whatever notoriety or popularity that they have, their platform, to lead others along that path with them. Um, there's a lot of things that happen within any particular person that'll cause them and their faith to be challenged. I know all people that knows that. I know that. Um, but during that time for me, I wasn't necessarily going, come here, Tyler, I'm going to talk to you about all the reasons why I don't believe this anymore. And I'm going to try to talk you into believing what I believe so that I take you with me. But they are totally using that, uh, using whatever platforms by way of social media. I've got 100,000 followers or 1 million followers or whatever, and I'm just going to tweet out all of this stuff. Well, I don't believe this about anymore, and their rationale might not even be good. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, in particular regard for me and you guys, like you guys were here the night that, um, I don't know, so many things fell right in line in ways that they should not have. Statistically, it should not have worked out. I shouldn't be here tonight. If I had my way, I wouldn't be here. But so be, being this guy that had some faith, and I'm going to study ways to figure out uh, how to open the eyes of atheists to some possibility that there be some being out there in the universe with knowledge, with complete knowledge of the universe. Um, just the possibility of God versus this strong atheist is like, there's no God in the universe. Well, you know what? That requires that you have absolute knowledge of the entirety of the universe. So there must be at least one being in the world, in the universe, that has absolute knowledge of it, because you just said that there's something there's nothing out there that has complete knowledge of it, but you have to have complete knowledge of it to say that there is nothing out there with complete knowledge of it. You have made yourself your own God through a series of misunderstandings, or I don't know, difficult times or events or whatever. I talked myself out of the possibility of a personal God. And then I come in here to a church service that was supposed to be the very last church service that I would ever, 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 ever come to. I come in here and I sit right about where you guys are from the old building. Yeah. And I've got a preacher pull out words that I used 4 years ago in a different church that he wasn't even at. I'm like, good grief. I'm just like totally getting mocked right now. Um, you know, using my own words through the mouth of another man um, to remind me, hey, you say I'm not personal. I've got this little checklist of things that we're going to go down today. And I've pulled a whole lot of strings to even get you here, and I'm going to show you. I am personal. I do know you. Um, I'm here only because of that. For he that is dead is freed from sin. Sure pay the consequences of it on that side of it, though, don't you? A, if we die out to self and submit our will to God's will, believe and trust. Those were the components of faith that we put forward the last time I was up here on this, right? So faith requires belief, and faith requires trust. We can free ourselves from sin yeah. So a man in prison, we've got uh, evidence or something that's come forward, and he's been freed from prison. Um, he stood trial, and now he's freed. So going back to verse 17, for if by one man's offense death reigneth by one, death and sin are intrinsically connected. So if we are freed from sin, are we not also freed from death? So we die out in this body in order to obtain spiritual life, right? Now, if we be dead with Christ, we believe that we shall also live with him. Knowing that Christ, being raised from the dead, dieth no more, death hath no more dominion over him. There's the old saying about things that you can't escape in this life. There's what, two things, right? Death and taxes. So maybe that's half true. Maybe we can escape death, spiritual death. For in that he died unto sin once, but in that he liveth unto God. Likewise reckon ye also yourselves to be dead indeed unto sin, but alive unto God through Jesus Christ our Lord. So there's only one way. Whenever the Bible says, and these are red letter words, right? I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me, Jesus. Oprah. Oh, there's more than one way, right? So what have we got? We got two contradictory statements that violates the law of logic, the law of non-contradiction. So it is possible Christ is telling the truth and Oprah's lying. Oprah's telling the truth and Christ is lying, or they're both lying. But it's impossible for them both to be telling the truth. Who are you going to trust? Oprah? Christ. So I told Tyler earlier that whatever we lose in depth will make up for in breadth, and we're out of both breadth and depth. So I think I'm gonna cut it off here, and we can sure hang out and talk about anything anybody wants to hang out and talk about. Go home. I don't care. I gotta wait on my kid to get back up here. She's with Nick, and I hope whatever's going on down there at the dairy bar is great. But I don't know. I wish I could have gave you more out of this than what I gave you, but I hope that if you got anything out of it, that it's at least good, a little bit good. So I appreciate you.